We are going to start with etouffee because it takes a little while and we have to get it prepared. We're going to let it simmer while we're doing our other items. Anybody know what etouffee is? Nobody? It basically translates to smothered in gravy or sauce, okay? Hence the red beans and rice, because we're going to put that down and let you put the etouffee on top, okay? An etouffee can be made with just about anything. New Orleans in Creole is most commonly with shrimp and crawfish. However, alligator has become more and more popular because alligator is now one of the best things you can ever eat. Traditionally, it is actually made with rabbit. And traditionally, it takes about 6 or 7 hours because you have to actually braise the rabbit. Not many people still do that anymore. You would have to sear your rabbit in a pan, cover it with your sauce, cover it with a lid in a Dutch oven, and then put it in the oven for about 4 hours till it gets tender enough to eat. Sorry, y'all, I'm not talking for 4 hours. So we found a slightly simpler recipe using mostly prepared products, just mixing them together so you still get that good flavor. And we're going to do shrimp and crawfish, crayfish, redneck lobster, mud bugs. What other names you know for them? I'm sure somebody knows for them. Crawdads. For our etouffee, we got our burner on high, eventually, and we're melting our butter in it. And I went ahead and I started chopping our peppers and our onions. I'm going to do the celery now while we're waiting. You want to keep this relatively uniform, about 1/4 inch for everything, because you want it to all cook evenly. And we'll chop it all up as quickly as we can. Now, all of our vegetables we're going to add together, so feel free to mix them all together as you're chopping them, put them all in one bowl. It's not going to hurt anything. These are all about the same consistency and the same texture, so they're all going to cook about the same time. There's nothing in here that's softer, so it shouldn't hurt anything to mix them all together. We're splitting all of our celery, and then we're just chopping them down. We're using, for this, just green peppers, onions, and celery, and of course garlic. Pretty sure garlic goes in everything, unless it's sweet. And as soon as our butter melts, we'll start throwing all this stuff in here. Cutting board keeps sliding away on me. I need something. Oh, you're late. You're late. All right, we're going to chop the rest of our onions. Now with our onions, everybody knows how to chop onions, right? Don't cut all the way through the back when you're cutting them in half. Leave that little knot on there, and that will hold your onion together and keep you from cutting your fingers off. Put the cut part to the front and cut 3/4 of the way through, so that when you pick it up, after you go all the way through, it's still held together. And then when you cross cut it, you're more worried about cutting than you are trying to catch loose pieces, okay? We'll get this other one cut, and I can hear my butter just about to bubble. So once I get this done, we're going to add this to it and go from there. Okay. Now our butter is just about melted and it's starting to sizzle. We're going to clean this cutting board off first. And you want to cook these until they're just about aromatic, translucent. You want them to start to be clear, but what you're really looking for is that smell. Once that smell comes up and it starts to be more apparent, that's how you know you're about ready. We'll add the rest of these. And we're going to add our garlic too. Again, I'm using pre-chopped garlic because we had some up here already. I always believe in using whatever you have instead of going to get fresh. If you have it, by all means, it's not going to hurt anything. You just want to increase the amount slightly because it's not quite as strong. But if you have fresh, by all means, that would be my first choice. Tomatoes we're using today are tomatoes with green chilies, okay? When they can these, they do your tomatoes just like normal, and they also do the green chilies the same way. They roast them, they peel the skins off, and then they chop them up so they mix them all together. It is a Food Club product, so it's downstairs on all of our shelves. black pepper. We'll need cayenne pepper as well. It calls for cream of shrimp soup, okay? That's a unfancy word for shrimp bisque. That's all this is. It's a cream shrimp soup. It is downstairs on the shelf. This is the only brand, however, that we have. Cream of mushroom soup, and then my favorite, crayfish, crawfish, crawdads. How many people here have played with these before or used them before? A few? Fishing doesn't count. They're not bait. I'm sure they're bait to somebody, but they are very easy to use. They're very easy to eat, and they're very enjoyable if you like the spicy whole style and lifestyle, okay? I've already prepared most of these, but I saved a few just so I can show you how to do them, and so you can see what they totally look like. They look like a baby lobster. Claws and all. They do have claws as well. With the claws, you simply break them off at the front. With the tails, you want to open the tail up, squeeze right behind where the shell changes consistency. It's going to go from a real solid shell to a rigid, more broken shell. That's where you want to squeeze and rock back and forth, and it pulls straight out. Okay? Now, if these were hot and you were eating them, you'd want to make sure to suck all the juice out of the head. And that is actually proper when you're eating crawfish. That's where all the spice and all the flavor is, because inside this shell absorbs all that cayenne pepper and all that spice when you're boiling them. And that's where most of your flavor comes from. Again, with these, we want to grab them right behind the hard shell and just rock it back and forth, and they pull right out. And the only thing you have to watch for is these little tiny legs. Every once in a while get stuck to the very back of the tail. You don't want any of them in there, because that's just something else you're going to have to pick out. So if you get a few stuck, I tried to, but it didn't work, just make sure you pick them off and keep them off to the side. We're starting to get hot, and our vegetables are starting to work. We'll keep that stirred down real quick. Now you can see the amount of vegetables that is in this to the amount of liquid that's going to it. It's going to be very hearty, okay? And that's what you're looking for. You want to have a lot of body to it, a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Come on, Keith. Put you on the spot. Again, we pop that tail off. You want it to be hearty. That's the word I'm looking for. Why can't I figure out hearty? Anybody start to smell this yet? Just a little bit. We're gonna let it go a little longer, just so they get a little bit more clear. How many people are fans of spicy foods? How many people were surprised when they came in and saw Cajun but didn't see Cajun in one recipe? Kind of silly, right? Most people associate Cajun with, let's get some Cajun seasoning and dump it on top of stuff. And really, that's not what Cajun is. Cajun is spicy, and it's all very spicy, but it's a lifestyle, and it's how they live, and it's more about the way that they cook things and the way they prepare things. Most Cajun is traditionally classical French, because that's where most French settlers came when they came to the United States. Louisiana, New Orleans, that whole area, hence the French Quarter in Louisiana, or New Orleans, I'm sorry. And again, there are tons of places down there that the predominant language is still French. And if you don't speak French, well, you're not eating. With Spanish food, you can kind of fake it. With French food, it is nowhere near what you're looking at. Okay.
Traditional Cajun cooking, now would they use the crawfish-whole?
Most of them would, because they don't waste anything. In true Cajun cooking, if they have a part on an animal that they can eat, they find a way to cook it and eat it. I mean, everything from the head to the tail, from a rabbit, it's the front to the back, it's the brains, the eyes. I mean, if you name it, they can eat it. And they figure out ways to do that. They use everything, right? Shrimp, they would do whole, because you get more flavor out of the heads and then you pick them out. And when you deal with that and those style of people, they tend to be more patient with their food, because they have less and they have much different lifestyles than we do. There's tons of TV shows on now about swamp people and alligator people and people who live in these backwoods and these bayous, and they literally live in shacks and shanties and on a house on a river. No running water, no electric, no nothing. So they eat everything, and anything they can find, if it goes in the pot, they find a way to eat it, okay? Our vegetables are now clear, and I'm pretty sure everybody in the room can smell those peppers and those onions and that garlic together, okay? We are going to add our tomatoes with chili. Actually, I want to add my spices first. The reason I want to add my spices first, especially with cayenne, it's going to clump if you don't. If you take cayenne and you have a big old pot of liquid and you pour it right on top, the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to have one ball of cayenne pepper, and I promise you that one person that gets it is not going to like you. Unless, of course, they really like hot stuff. But we're going to sprinkle that in and try and spread it out. Now there is some butter in here and that's going to clump it up a little bit, but it'll be much easier to spread in this tiny bit of liquid than it will be with all that other. That and cayenne pepper is bright red. So in this pot, it sticks out like a sore thumb. If we add those tomatoes to it, it's going to be really hard to see and really hard to tell if it's all clumping. So we'll add our pepper and our cayenne, and we're going to add our chilies and our tomatoes. And I'll leave one of these up so you can look. And I can already smell that cayenne coming off of there. We'll get that mixed down real good, and then we're going to add our soups to it right away, and then we're going to simmer it for a little while. And while we're simmering this, we're going to start with our rice and get that done. Again, cream of shrimp or shrimp bisque works the exact same way. They're both a cream-based, shrimp-flavored product. They're very, very creamed or pureed. There's not a lot of chunks in them. There's not a lot of pieces or shells. With like a potato soup or a clam chowder soup, you have a lot of chunks. With these, they're far more refined, and there's much less texture to them. There's a lot of body, and there's a lot of creaminess and richness to it, but you don't have the real big pieces and the real big chunks that are there. Leave that one out. And that's much thinner than you can see up compared to the shrimp one.
It says 1 can on here.
I'm doubling this whole thing
Okay.
just because of the people.
Is there any issue with the different size of the cans? In other words, the quantities aren't real critical here.
As long as they're similar, you naturally don't want a 10 can of one and a...
Right, but I see the professor is bigger than the others.
Most of your mushroom soups, almost all of them, actually are concentrated. So they're this size can, but you have to double it with milk or water. I just picked one that was actually a straight use product. Instead of actually having to increase the liquid that's in this, it's just kind of eliminating a step. Whereas this is a ready to serve. It says semi-condensed, but with the juices from the tomatoes, it works out. We're just gonna stir this all together real quick. And because they're cream-based soups, they should absorb some of that butter that's in there that we sauteed with and got started with. We're gonna let this simmer, and it should thicken a little bit as it all blends together. And once it gets hot, we'll add our shrimp to it, which if I don't get out of the fridge, I will forget. Everyone here knows I forget something every week. And our crayfish. But they're not quite yet. I am gonna cover this for a little while, just to get it hot, bring the temperature up faster, and then once it's hot, we can take the lid off and we can actually watch it a little closer. It is a non-stick pan, so I'm hoping we don't have to worry about our product sticking to the base. I have our solution to get it to stop boiling. We're gonna add the rest of our ingredients. Now that it's simmered and it's gotten somewhat thick, and you can see how hearty and how full-bodied that is, we're always gonna add our raw stuff first. These are cooked products, so they're just a matter of warming them up. With your shrimp, please don't ever pour them into your product. There's so much water inside this bowl from when we thawed it out that it would water down your product. Make sure you always take them out and then add them to it. Again, once we stir all that down, it's going to stop that boiling for about, I don't know, a minute, maybe two. And then we're going to add our mud bugs. And like I said, claws We're leaving in here with them. We wanted to take the bodies off, mostly because of the legs that are on them. It's just a lot more work having to pick through them. And you'll get from the shells a lot more flavor. So now with that in there, it's on low. We're gonna let it simmer while we play with our beignets. And with this, our shrimp have all curled to just about an open sea. So we're gonna shut that off. Nope, that's the little one. And I'm just gonna slide it back so it's not quite on the heat so much. But because it's such a thick product, it should hold temperature for quite some time. Now the only thing I want to do with this is I want to set a few of my claws aside. And the only reason I want to do that is so that I can put them on top so that you can see them. Especially that big one. Now this is basically a hearty soup or a hearty stew. And it is almost always served with some form of rice. Reason being, here in this culture, in this area, it's a lot of soup beans and cornbread. Down there, this is their soup beans. Okay? It's their peasant food. It's stuff that they can catch out of the bayous, out of the swamps, out of the creeks, stuff that they can grow very simply. And naturally, rice is the thickener or the starch for it down there because that's what they have, that's what's convenient, and that's what's inexpensive. Similar to cornbread down here because corn is so popular, cornmeal is so available. Similar to polenta in Italian cuisines or pastas because that's their inexpensive product. We have that all worked down. Now again, I said I wanted to save my claws for two reasons. One, I like the way claws look. I think they're bright red and add a little bit of color to it. And two, if you look at that dish right now, are you 100% positive that there's shells in it? Okay? If you don't have the claws on there and you can't see the crayfish tails or the crawfish tails, you may not realize or may not know that there are shells in there. So by doing something that displays them up on top of the surface, it kind of lets people know. It's like the seeds in certain products. You want to make sure that they're either really visible or not there at all. Sprinkling sesame seeds on top of something works very well. That's kind of the same thing. We want to just make sure that everybody who comes up here to that bowl or who comes to your house or comes to dinner or comes to anywhere knows positively that there's shells in there.